Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. For some excellent news, it seems that now Libya has at last been liberated from the 42-year tyrannical rule of Colonel Moammar al-Gaddafi. Now, Gaddafi still has not himself been captured. However, the Libyan rebels, a broad-based coalition from both the west and the east of Libya, are now in control of Tripoli and have completely taken over Gaddafi's compound from which he perpetrated his reign of terror for far too long. Now, of course, it remains to capture Gaddafi, and I do hope that he is captured alive so that he can get put on trial for crimes against humanity. Either way, I'm not particularly concerned about his fate as long as he is out of power. But I do think that a thorough, systematic, but speedy trial would be excellent for really getting an in-depth examination of the atrocities that he committed, an accounting of what he has done, and perhaps some sort of compensation and/or retribution for the victims of his totalitarian rule. Now, this situation is clearly not over. The real task for the people of Libya, the task of building a free society, has only begun. And hopefully, they will be able to manage a free society and not a society that is ravaged by tribal infighting, by demonization of the other, or by a return to a demagogical authoritarian figure in the mold of Gaddafi. Unfortunately, many societies that lose a totalitarian regime often develop a sense of nostalgia for it and want to return to it. Sometimes it's quite tragic, as in my former homeland of Belarus, where after the fall of the Soviet Union, the people had a wonderful chance at freedom and they absolutely blew it. Let's hope that the people of Libya do better than that. However, I would also like to emphasize that it is not the role of the United States, it is not the role of NATO, it is not the role of the European countries to dictate or oversee the transition of Libya to a freer society and a freer form of government. This is a task that the Libyan people have to engage in themselves. Otherwise, it will not be sustainable, it will not be lasting, and it will be just another debacle like Afghanistan, like Iraq, like so many other places where the United States has attempted to impose its will rather than allow the situation to evolve in a more sustainable fashion. So it's not clear to me whether without the NATO intervention the Libyan rebels would have gotten to the point of capturing Tripoli. It seems like NATO advisors did have a role in planning the specific strategy that got the rebels to that point, encouraging the rebels to form sleeper cells within the city that would wait until the main forces in the west and east made substantial progress past Gaddafi's defenses so that they could also rise up and take parts of the city from within. It seems to have been an effective strategy, but who knows, maybe without NATO intervention the rebels would have done it anyway, or the rebels would have developed a different, more effective strategy. It's also tragic that the NATO intervention actually resulted in the deaths of some rebels from NATO bombing attacks, as well as the deaths of quite sizable numbers of the very civilians that the NATO bombing campaign was supposed to save against Gaddafi's forces. These are the brutal consequences of any war, and I don't want to dismiss them as collateral damage. This is why I'm opposed to war, and that includes this one. Furthermore, it seems to me that the US intervention in Libya was clearly unconstitutional, and now is the time to end it. Now that Gaddafi is out of power, now that civilians are no longer imminently threatened by his thugs, it is time for the US to eliminate all military involvement in Libya, especially any sort of permanent or quasi-permanent involvement in overseeing the transition. It is time to fully hand over that job to the Libyan people. Now, with all of that said, I think the outcome of the Libyan civil war is tremendously positive. Not because of NATO's involvement, not because of the US involvement, but because the Libyan people do finally have a chance at freedom, however they are going to use it. When the rebels liberated Tripoli, they were greeted by massive cheering and jubilation. It just shows how the people struggled under Gaddafi's regime, how oppressed they perceived themselves to be, and generally how they welcomed their liberators in Tripoli. The liberation has not been particularly violent towards civilians. There has, of course, been fighting in the streets between Gaddafi loyalists and the rebel forces. There has been some looting of Gaddafi-owned structures, which is only sensible, the people taking back the wealth that their totalitarian oppressors have stolen from them for the past 42 years. So it is quite understandable. I do not believe there has been looting of peaceful civilians. So I would like to offer my congratulations to the people of Libya for getting rid of this absolutely abominable thug who would use all kinds of political censorship, oppression, murder, theft, even encouragement of his soldiers to rape innocent civilians in order to stay in power. This man is the lowest of the low, and it is my fervent hope that he can be brought to justice. At the same time, it is my hope that the Libyan people will be able to bring him to justice and will be able to improve their own situation without relying on the taxpayers in the US and in Europe.